Essentially, the vision we have for the company is to make technology just more connected. So making it easier for one tool to talk to another so that there's this connectivity layer between different business applications.
Welcome to Fork Around and Find Out, the podcast about building, running, and maintaining software and systems. Do you hear that sound? No, don't worry, you're not on call. That's the ad spot. But if you're hearing my voice, that means we haven't reached our SLAs for sponsors this month. But you can help us fix that by going to fafo.fm/sponsor. Do you know any podcasts that have more F's in their name? You know you want to sponsor this podcast. If you know what an SLA means, then you'll want to reach the thousands of people that are downloading this podcast. I promise you, we've only put out 5 episodes, and we have more than 1,000 downloads and listens per episode already. We're just getting started. Not only can you sponsor the pre-roll, the mid-roll, or a game, but we also have a back catalog of ad spots that you can take for all the downloads going forward. So if you're interested in reaching an audience of developers, infrastructure engineers, and just people that like this sort of technology, go to fafo.fm/sponsor and check out our packages. Hello and welcome to Fork Around and Find Out. I am Justin Garrison, and with me today is Autumn Nash and Lauren Long. How's it going, Lauren?
Great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great.
We are excited to talk to you.
We are going to YAML indent our way through this host list of things that you do at Ampersand. Can you tell us about Ampersand?
Oh, what? Wait, why are you being mean to us, Justin?
Hey, I'm trying to throw in a pun at the beginning of every show, and there's YAML on their homepage.
No, that was a really good joke. I'm very impressed.
See, we can YAML. And like, I just look at the YAML list and I'm like, that is just, we're going to go through this today. So,
okay, tell us about your company.
Sure. So we use YAML, as we just mentioned. Ampersand is a developer platform for building integrations. So we help SaaS builders, we help AI engineers integrate with systems of records that their customers have. So some examples could be you need to read sales data from someone's Salesforce or HubSpot, or you want to read customer support data from someone's Zendesk. And these kind of integrations are kind of hard to build and they're hard to maintain. So instead of doing that in-house with your engineering team, you can use our configuration-driven YAML spec to build an integration. We also offer components like an embeddable UI library, a dashboard for monitoring and doing customer support. And you can essentially focus your engineering efforts on the parts that make your product special and leave the integrations piece and the data movement piece to us.
I appreciate that you call out that, you say write your integrations in code with a screenshot of YAML, literally just saying that YAML is code and we're all okay with this. And I'm 100% on board. Like if you're writing YAML, own it. Like this is code. And also a little bit of shade on the drag and drop editors right there too, which is cool. What sort of infrastructure software, like what's on the back end there? Like how are you designing that? Is this YAML spec an artifact of like, we're writing Kubernetes manifest for you? Or is there something else going on here?
Great question. In terms of our stack underneath the hood, so we run on Google Cloud. We use Kubernetes. I'm an ex-Google engineer.
Called it out from the start.
Dude, Lauren's she is a superhero out here.
So, we use a lot of technology that you guys have already talked about on the show previously. We use Google Compute Engine. We use Temporal, which is an open source product that is helping us with the orchestration piece. It helps with the workflow executions and some of the scheduling piece that we do, and also helps us with retry logic, things like that. A bunch of other technologies I'm happy to dive into, but we're very heavy on the scalable and open source technologies.
I don't think we even started with we started with your name and the company. What's your position there?
Yeah, so I am the co-founder and CTO.
How did you decide like this was a problem? Like if you're founder, you're going to build this thing, like you were at Google, I'm assuming before, and you're just like, I need to go build something else. And this is the thing that looks like it needs to be built.
So I was on the Firebase team at Google. Firebase is a developer platform, and I was leading the Cloud Functions product, and then I led the launch of a new product called Firebase Extensions. So Firebase Extensions is a marketplace of prepackaged solutions that help Firebase apps add additional functionality with the click of a button, as we say. And a lot of those additional packages that we developed that were the most popular ended up being integrations related. So they were doing things like integrating with Stripe or integrating with Twilio. And we realized through that process that integration is actually a very hard problem, and B, something that if you did it right, developers are very happy to offload to a third party. What I had realized while building that product was a lot of what we were doing was helping people integrate with their own tools. So Stripe is your app with your own Stripe instance. Twilio is your app with your own Twilio instance. But what's even harder is if you have to now integrate with your customers' different tools. So if you're building an integration with your customer's Notion, each customer's Notion is going to look very different, and you now have this exponential problem that you have to solve in terms of all the customizations everyone wants to do. And this becomes even more the case in tools like Salesforce and HubSpot, these heavily configurable, heavily customizable tools where everyone's Salesforce setup looks different. They're going to have custom objects, custom fields. And if you are a SaaS engineer trying to build integrations for that works well with all of your customers, you're going to just spend all of your time doing that and still not be able to keep up. So you really need a dedicated platform like Ampersand that will take care of that complexity for you, so you can work with clean data, normalized data to build the additional magic that your app will do on top of that data.
Can you describe one of those, like a common integration that people are doing? Like I want to tie these two things together. Salesforce, like is it bringing Salesforce people into Notion, or what do those sort of integrations look like?
There's a lot of AI companies now, and a lot of them are solving sales and marketing problems. So they're helping people do outbound better. They're helping people to do cold calls. They're helping people to do lead scoring. And for any of those AI agents to do their work well, they need to access the data that already exists. So if a salesperson has already put lead data into their CRM, the agent needs to know what those leads are. And then B, the agent needs to be able to write data back. So the agent goes off and enriches the data with additional data sources, maybe does some pulling together from LinkedIn, from the internet, and adds some additional context. There's now a need to write back to the CRM. So then the human agent who then looks at that data later can see this nice view of all of the context that has been collected. So you need that bi-directional integration of both reading and write in order for these agentic workflows to actually work well.
And then under the hood, you say you're using Temporal, you're using Kubernetes, you're using GCP. How does that plug together? Like if I look at your, again, just going to the homepage example, I see a schedule in there, right? It's like */10. I'm like, okay, every 10 minutes and then every 10 days, it's going to trigger something. What does that look like? I mean, that's a cron job, right? But is that like Temporal then goes and fires off a Kubernetes pod that has your integrations connected into it and then says, oh, I suck in this data and stick it over there?
Yeah, great question. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to find the commonalities between all of our integrations and build the framework around those common patterns. So we integrate with over 100 different SaaS products. And what we found is there's some patterns there. So there's kind of the more structured data. So the CRMs and the marketing automation and the customer support tools, where you can essentially almost think of it as a giant database, and each table represents a different concept, and there's rows inside of these tables. And then there's more semi-structured data like a Notion or Slack, where it's more content heavy. And within a document, you might have different information, and then it's organized into folders or channels with different permissions. And then if you go even further down the unstructured side, you have just, data warehouses and databases and things like that. So once you can squint at a tool and figure out which pattern it fits into, you can also figure out what are the interactions that someone wants to do with it. So I mentioned read and write. We also have subscribe, which is more like real-time updates of getting notified whenever something changes in the source system. Out of those, you have things like synchronous behavior. So when you want to do a write and then get a result back right away to know whether or not the write succeeded. You have asynchronous things. You have scheduled things. And with those common patterns, we're able to build abstractions for them within our own system. And some of those abstractions are built using Temporal. When you do a scheduled read within our integrations, for example, we do kick off a temporal schedule. And that schedule has a bunch of input parameters in it that tells it which SaaS tool it's going to read from, what are the configuration that it needs to know about that either the SaaS builder or the end customer has specified. And with that input, is able to then follow a set of instructions in order to get the output that we need. And then we have another part of our system that's more pub/sub based, that does data transformation, that does the relay of the data to the SaaS builder. So I guess at a high level, we've tried to find patterns in terms of how these SaaS products operate, and as well as patterns in terms of how people want to integrate with them. And then we've built frameworks around it internally in our platform.
Why'd you choose Temporal? Like, it seems like it's a workflow engine. It can do a lot of stuff, and there's a bunch of things that do stuff like that, right? I mean, you could do that with Jenkins, you could do it with Kubernetes jobs, you could do it with all these things. You do Bash scripts and cron jobs, whatever. Like, why'd you go down that route? Especially if you're coming from working at Google, you had like pub/sub exists there. Like, you could fire off something and have it come, read the queue and do it all manually with functions, right? Like, some people would try to build that from scratch.
And we definitely considered it, but ultimately we landed on Temporal because it does a lot more than just the execution of the workflows. It also has a dashboard that's very easy for us to debug. So if we have a customer support request and someone says, this integration isn't running, can you look into it? We can very easily query our Temporal dashboard, figure out exactly what happened, what are the errors that got logged. So that customer support piece was really handy. And it also has a bunch of other functions that would have taken us time to build, like retry logic. We can be pretty specific about what are the conditions for retry, what are the conditions for not retry, and what's the schedule for retry. And we can also manually trigger retries within the UI pretty easily. All of that we could have built, but it would have just taken a lot longer to build than using something out of the box.
Yeah, I know a lot of people that have done that with like step functions, right? Like, they're like, oh, look, step functions has a retry. I'm just going to use that. And it's just like, well, like, it's not the best interface for it. It's a pretty low level sort of, like, if you didn't catch the exact error, you might have some problems there. Temporal is firing off these jobs. It's getting that configuration. It's doing that data. And you have hundreds of integrations. You say, really? It's like anyone can integrate any of these two SaaS platforms together. And a lot of it sounds like a more business-friendly Zapier or If This Then That. If people remember those tools, right? It's like, oh, we can tie these APIs together in magical ways and just let you be creative with it. And some of those are usually prescribed, and they're like, oh, you have to do it. Like, If This and That was very structured, you can only do certain fields. Zapier and Microsoft has not Power Tools, it's Power Automation, whatever the tool is called now, where it's like, yeah, I can tie this API, I can have some runner, and then I can call another API, and like, hopefully somewhere in the middle there, if it fails. What challenges do you have with that? I mean, like, obviously there's a ton of challenges tying together hundreds of APIs, but like, what do you wish it would do? What is the thing you're missing, or this thing like, oh, we need to improve in this area?
That's a great question. I think our biggest challenges haven't been infra related. I think the infra tools that we chose have served as well. Is really just the APIs we integrate with. Sometimes we scratch our heads as to why certain design choices were made.
Choices weren't made. They evolved.
Certain choices just, came about because no one made them. Before we started the company, I never thought that there were so many ways of authenticating to an API. It turns out there's a lot. And there's a lot of non-standard ways of doing it. Not everyone follows OAuth. And people that claim to follow it sometimes will require extra parameters, extra headers you have to pass in that now is some bespoke code you have to write. So I think really just the inconsistency between APIs has been the most surprising. And you can definitely tell that for certain companies, their API was an afterthought, that it was not well designed.
How do you deal with the different APIs and kind of trying to keep it all uniformed for your product and how you take everything in?
We have an open source connectors library. And as a part of that, we've also tried to develop what are the set of configuration that we need to know for each API. And what are things that can live in a configuration file versus in code. So each of our providers, we call them, the APIs we integrate with, will have a configuration file that has certain things that are common, like what is the base URL for an API? What are the headers you have to pass in when you're making a request? What kind of API key or OAuth tokens does it accept? Those are things we can have some structure around. And then there's things like pagination logic or errors, like some APIs return 200 OK no matter what.
Here's your error JSON, 200 OK.
Exactly. So then you have to actually write code to be able to read the nested structure inside of the body to figure out if it was actually an error or not. So those are things that live in code. So we've had to kind of make a decision as to what are things that are common that can be configuration, what are things that actually just have to be code. And we tried as much as we can to push everything to configuration. But of course, sometimes there's a lot of code to be written also.
There's always that one part that just has to be different. And you're like, but why?
Yeah, exactly.
I like the distinction between like, this is just some data and this is some software, right? And being able to not always clearly define it. Like it's hard because at some points those like shift, like some of the data, like you think it's a URL, but actually like, oh, that's a different URL in this case. So I need data or I need software to change that at some point. And you have to shift some data into software, and some software can be like, oh, this is just a common pattern. We can stick it in the config file. How does your API for that change over time, right? Because like you don't control Salesforce's API. And if they change their configuration, hey, we have a version 2, now you have to update what things are data and which ones are code. Is that just, okay, user, go figure it out, we're going to migrate you at some point? Or is that like you're going to try to hide that as much as possible?
Our approach so far has been we hide that from our builders. So they have one consistent interface to work with, and we handle whatever needs to get changed in order to move on to the next version in a breaking change scenario. And so far that has worked out. I think in the future, we may encounter scenarios where we want to actually support 2 versions of an API, in which case there would be in our YAML file a way for builders to opt into going to the next version ahead of time, for example. But I think we'd like to avoid that as much as possible and just give people one consistent thing to work with.
A lot of the problems you're describing here just remind me of Amazon, like AWS. All of the 200 services, the APIs are not consistent. And then they threw out whatever the version 2 SDKs and everything. Like, oh, you got to opt into this new SDK. By the way, it breaks a bunch of stuff. And then some services didn't support it the same way. And some things had different ways to do auth. That's a lot of just like stuff to maintain and figure out for yourself. Like if you're trying to hide that from a customer and say like, I'm going to give you a clean interface to all these other services that's consistent. That's just a lot of like, you have to keep track of versions, not only versions for the SaaS, but like versions of possibly even like customer per SaaS, right? Because some customers might have newer versions of the APIs depending on how they signed up or when they signed up or what access they have into that platform, right?
I almost think that's your value prop, though.
Exactly. You got it.
Because people are always like, oh, well, I'll just build it myself and it's cheaper. And not just that, but like a lot of products are built by people that have great ideas, but they don't know how to implement them. And this is one of those things where you can tell you were a former engineer at a high level because you've dealt with that problem probably, and you know that it's going to break something else. So you've made it in a way that completely makes it worth paying that cost because it's going to make it so much easier on your developer. So a lot of times you're like, why are we solving this problem? Because nobody asked you for that. This is something that you can point directly to the value of your product to make a developer's life easier. Like you've made it where they're not making consistent, like over and over and over again changes to their applications. You're making it where they can focus on what they actually are building and not all these APIs. Like that's a huge value that you know that every time somebody updates these multiple APIs, you're not breaking somebody else's product.
Totally. Autumn, can we hire you for marketing?
I got you, girl. I got you.
You know, but you're spot on. And I think that's kind of the trap that some people fall into if they haven't built with these APIs before. They'll think, how hard could it be? You know, the API is documented. I'll just go ahead.
I mean, like integrating 2 things is pretty easy. Integrating 5 things is a little more difficult. Integrating 100 things over a year is extremely difficult, right? Like those things aren't just like linear. This is a little bit harder now. It's like, oh, that old software that no one knows how the code works anymore is still using the old API. Someone has to go in and figure it out and then break it and then make sure it works again.
It's not even just putting 2 things together though. You can completely denormalize your data if APIs change. You know what I mean? You can break multiple steps of a process. Like you're talking about, I think right now, or during zero interest rates, people kind of were idea fairies and they're just like, I have an idea and I'm going to make this startup. And you're like, but why? You know what I mean? And now we're kind of getting to the point where like I think people are being more thoughtful about why they're starting companies. I mean, some people aren't, but whatever. And I think like it's been like a long time since like we've seen people really solve a problem that you can point directly to how that adds value to your developers. And think about the engineering hours that people spend trying to fix something when an API breaks stuff. Like you can take down half of an app. You can completely like, not even just the big breaking changes, small erosions of your data normalization can completely cause re-architectures and refactoring of your application. You know what I mean? So the fact that for one, you're going to give them two different options, right? So they can then check it out, figure out what kind of change they want to do, but roll it back if they need to. Your company is giving such value to people trying to use it, because how many apps are just a bunch of APIs under it and taking in data and then giving people a useful way to do it, right? So,
but Autumn, we call it AI, and then it's sorry.
Can we just talk about that?
Like you are three
Lauren
APIs in a trench coat.
Good idea. That's not just throwing AI on something. I'm so excited, y'all. People who are startup founders, hire Lauren as an advisor. She'll give you good ideas and not just putting AI on things. Because but this is exciting. It is a full value. Like you can walk in and tell somebody, these are the ways that I can make your business better for paying me this small fee. Like I'd give you a big fee for that. You can directly in a business meeting say this bottom line versus your developer hours. You know what I mean? That's an easy sell in a meeting, when you're trying to get money for something. And I think that's amazing.
Lauren, what did you learn in this process of building this as a product and selling it and everything else? Like you probably went in thinking this is going to be easy to do this part of it, or something was going to be hard and maybe it wasn't. What have you learned through this process?
So I like to compare and contrast this with my past experiences, and I'll compare with Firebase because that was where I spent a lot of my career. And what I realized is Firebase was a primarily developer-facing product, and our buyers were developers, our users were developers. And I had thought that for Ampersand, that would be the case also, because that's what we do. We help developers build their applications, build integrations faster and better. But what we're actually realizing is developers aren't the only people that are affected by this problem. It's actually a lot of other folks, like people who are trying to sell that can't close deals because their product is lacking certain integrations that a customer wants. Or customer support folks that are having trouble responding to customers that complain about integrations because they have no visibility into why things went wrong. Is also the founders, the CEOs, people that are thinking strategically about where they can unlock data sources so that their application can be more powerful, more usable, and do more things. So it's actually a problem that affects a bunch of people beyond developers. And that was actually kind of in hindsight, obvious, but I didn't know that when we started the company. So that's been interesting to see also.
What you described there too is just like something that a lot of people that have moved from monoliths to microservices, they're like, oh, well, now I need to integrate all these microservices, all the databases somewhere. My application needs to do a bunch more work to take a bit from that one and a bit from that one. And a lot of what you're doing is the same sort of like we're moving data around and we're making sure that enough data is in enough places to make it hopefully useful for whoever's trying to consume that. Because back in we have one database, go to the Oracle database and get all of your data with this 80 table join, you'll be fine. And now we're like, oh no, we need to pull those apart, even though it's a different part of the business. Doing that, if it's like you say, if it's not the developer directly, they don't know why that's a problem. They don't know why that's hard to do, and enabling them to say, oh, get that little bit of data over here, then call this one, and then you can get your full report, your internal application, your API, your page can have everything you need to do your job.
But sometimes it is the developer or you're another part of the business and you're taking all those APIs to put it in that one database to serve multiple microservices. So it's like...
Don't get me started on microservices all pulling from the same database. That's just... you don't have microservices.
People argue microservices and monoliths when you're like talking about the same exact thing and nobody knows what they're talking about.
Where do you think, besides the APIs on all these providers are sometimes garbage, where does it break? Where does your system fall? You say that in Temporal, you get a lot of observability, or at least you can visualize and retry things to make sure it's going to run again. But at some point it's like, oh, that broke and we don't know why. API change, config change, whatever. Is that the main portion that like those runners are still kind of fragile tying these things together? Or is there somewhere else which you're like, oh, this needs to get better. We need to improve in a certain area. If you don't have an answer, that's fine too. So like that's usually like, I often think of it as like, what was the last outage we had? What was the thing that like we got to improve on for next time? It's like, okay, is that something that was because we didn't design it properly? Was that because it was something out of our control? Was that, how does that affect us?
It could also be how your last release went, because that's a lot of infra is trying to make it better, make the process better the next time.
Yeah, if I think about the last outage we had, and we since solved that problem, was we have autopilot mode set up on our Kubernetes. And essentially what that means is when we have certain metrics that it measures, and when it's past a certain threshold, it'll automatically scale up. And then when the metric comes down, it'll automatically scale down. And it worked, and that was great. But our code didn't really handle the scale down part very well. And so when it scaled down, some of our processes didn't handle the cancellation properly and kind of just got shut down prematurely. We've since fixed it, but if I think back to the last thing we had to fix infra-wise, that was it, handling scaling down.
I think that's really interesting though, because nobody ever talks about scaling down. Everyone's always like, but what if you scale up? Exactly. Like they're always like, but what if we don't have enough capacity? And nobody talks about trying to anticipate what happens when the capacity goes away because you don't need it anymore. Because it is a whole nother set of problems that people don't always talk about.
When you're driving down the freeway and you see one of those billboards that say your ad here, this is basically the audio version of that billboard. This is Justin Still. We are still looking for sponsors for this podcast. We are having a great time learning with everyone in the community about how infrastructure works, how people are adapting to problems, and even looking for solutions that solve some of those problems. We don't do pay-to-play episodes, but we do love to promote people in the ad spots so other people can learn about what you're doing. If you are a sponsor and you're looking to reach this audience of developers and engineers, go to fafo.fm/sponsor and check out our packages. Coming from, like a lot of people talk about, like you said, scale up and like cold start, right? And no one talks about the like cold shutdown. Right? It's like, what happens when we're just like, it's dead? Like we lost that process. Coming from doing Firebase and Cloud Functions, why Kubernetes?
I obviously considered using Cloud Functions and Cloud Run and all of the more quote unquote serverless products. And ultimately, we decided to go with Kubernetes because it was just cheaper for what we needed. Like I think Cloud Functions.
Hold up, like Cloud Functions.
Okay.
That is a cool story right there. Just like, because I tell people
Justin's
all the time.
Justin's about to throw so much shade right now. Everybody, just sit down. Be ready.
Functions are cheap to a scale limit, right? And then they're more expensive because it's like it is the most expensive thing you can buy for computes.
It's the most expensive compute, exactly. Yeah.
As long as you don't use much of it, right? As long as you're scaling to zero. And at some point you're like, hey, I can just do the math and this threshold crossed the boundary where I have this running all the time, or I have so much of this stuff running that expensive compute that's handled for me, that gives you a lot of value, use it all the time. I tell people all the time, use functions, use serverless, absolutely. And then that threshold, you say you're over that threshold where even coming from a serverless world where you're like, you know that stuff amazingly well, I'm sure. Like you were just like, you could build anything you want on top of Firebase and Cloud Functions. You're like, we got to go the Kubernetes routes.
That's essentially the premise of cloud services though, right? You use cloud services when you're not sure about your scale and when you're growing and you're still small, right? Like because it does the heavy lifting of you not having to worry about it. Yes, thank you. Like you're not having to worry about those processes. You figure out where your scale is. You figure out what your margins are of the capacity that you need. And then when you get your startup application, whatever, in very stable, predictable manner, hopefully, or a predictable scale at least, then once you're done building that part of your application, then you can spend more time rebuilding your infrastructure yourself and building it to that capacity. That is the premise. It's just because people got hammer happy, just like they are with AI, with the cloud, and they want it to use the cloud for everything. And that's not what it's for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you got it. And we do use Cloud Functions, actually. Most of our server is run on Kubernetes, but there's certain parts of our infrastructure that are spiky. So maybe, once every hour, we'll need a lot of capacity and the rest of the hour is zero. That's
Turns
a
out those
perfect
cron
use
jobs.
case.
Y'all hire Lauren. Like, can we just talk? She knows how to do startup ideas that actually add value, that have like that longevity. And then did you hear her just explain how to use like on-prem versus cloud? Because if one more bro on Twitter tries to tell everybody everything can be done on-prem is just as bad as everything that can be done on cloud. You see how she knows the difference? Like, Lauren, I love you. Like,
Thank you. But I think you're absolutely right. It is just about picking the right tool for the job. I mean, there's all these primitives that you can use, and you have to think about your traffic patterns, think about what performance characteristics you need, and then pick the right tool for the job. And I think of it in terms of a spectrum between Cloud Functions, between Cloud Run, which is running Docker containers, fabulous product, Kubernetes, and then we're on autopilot mode, so it's almost like the sort of serverless way of doing Kubernetes.
It's the easy managed Kubernetes sort of.
Exactly.
Did you start that way? Was this like, I mean, because like, did you go into it saying like, hey, we know we're going to have this much usage and we just need to build Kubernetes from the start?
Yeah, we did do that from the beginning. And another reason why we decided to do it this way is there are certain things that in our product that are ongoing processes that we need to run. And that's not a good fit for Cloud Function. Cloud Function is better for ephemeral processes.
if Lauren ever sells this startup, because she's going to be very successful. So if she ever sells this startup and she's on the market, someone hire her. Give her so much money. Like,
Autumn's always trying to get people jobs up front. She's just like, I don't care.
I love it.
people are out here listening to like random tech bros on LinkedIn, taking it as God's word out here and like just lighting millions of dollars on fire. And Lauren's like, yes, I built it the right way the first time.
I also need you to be my personal publicist.
Okay, but like, is anything I said a lie though? Just out here using common sense and technical skill to actually build things the correct way, not because it's your favorite tool in the box. It's true. Like, I'm gonna call Lauren the next time some dude tries to argue with me on LinkedIn. I'm gonna tag her.
All right, I'm here for you.
Does Temporal glue all those things together? Like, is it just like, oh, this piece runs in Kubernetes, this piece runs on Cloud Functions, this one's Cloud Run?
So Temporal is an orchestrator, it's not compute. So it doesn't actually care where you run.
But it can trigger all of those jobs, and you just say like, oh, this one is this cron job that fires off at the top of the hour. We're gonna do functions for that because everyone's gonna do it right now, right?
You could. It would be a little tougher to use Temporal inside of Cloud Functions because you do have to initialize the client that will listen to the Temporal orchestrator. So if you had a Cloud Function, you'd have to kind of initialize it every time. It is actually far easier to use Temporal with Kubernetes or something else that doesn't shut down.
That agent has to check back in and check on those jobs. Makes a lot of sense.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's what Lauren just said is also really true. People think of these products in magical terms, right? But they're all compute and orchestration, and like they're like, it's the same stuff.
Database, network, and compute is tied together in a different way.
Exactly. And it's like when you're solving a math problem, right? Something in calculus, or just, I don't know, how you bake a certain type of recipe, like, right? Like if you're going to do a croissant, you need the butter to be flaky. Like they're all recipes for something, but it's how you glue all these things together. And I think if we looked at it in like a non-biased way like that, how are we going to glue the compute together? How are we going to have it orchestrated? And like, it would make our job so much easier.
And no matter what Google search AI tells you, don't put glue in your recipes.
Did it tell you that?
It was telling people to put glue in their recipes.
It did tell people to eat glue. And
is that what you put in your cookies yesterday, Justin?
My cookies were bad for, I don't know
hold
why.
Up. She's funny too. Like Lauren does type 2 fun. She is a great engineer, and she just threw shade at Justin. Look, me and Lauren are best friends now. I'm sorry.
It sounds like so many things have gone right during this process. What is something that a customer has done that surprised you, or you're like, you are holding it wrong? Like the iPhone, like, no, you did this wrong. And maybe that's our fault because we gave you too much leash. Maybe that's because you just don't know what you're doing. But what's something that a customer has surprised you doing with this tool?
Customers surprise me all the time, and they're not wrong. They're not holding it wrong. I just didn't realize that was a way of holding it.
You can't see Lauren's face, but her face, like I felt it. Like
just the like I could see her in a customer call says, "Oh, that's interesting." Right? That is just like the most okay.
But who hasn't had that moment? You're just like, oh, really? Oh, wow. Okay. You're just like I guess that's what we're doing. Also, Justin, you're not allowed to send anybody cookies as a thank you gift from this podcast.
No, my baking is not good.
We need you to ask for help and go to the grocery store.
Was there anything that like one of those customers did though that was like, oh, we should build that in? Like, oh, that's a surprising thing that you did that maybe originally I thought was wrong, but now that's like, oh, that's gonna be our feature, right? Like someone else is gonna want to do that.
Yeah, recently we had a customer ask for permissions for write and read to be split up. So normally we use the same permission model for both read and write, and it's based on the user who is using the integration. And then they asked for a use case where they want the read to happen through an admin account, so it has full access, whereas they want the write to happen as the user's permission set. So then the write is controlled at the user level, which is actually a very good use case. We just haven't encountered that.
That's a really good best practices.
Yeah, definitely. So, we'll definitely build towards that. So there's many things like that where we actually do learn a lot from our customers. And even though some of them, might seem odd in the beginning, there's a reason why people do it that way. And it's usually a good reason.
Did you hear that, you guys? She has a feedback loop. Hire Lauren for things. She listens to her customers.
It feels like a lot of the integrations, a lot of the pipelines are going to be, you have to now understand their org chart and their process, right? Because a lot of these integrations seem like they're going to fall in that zone of like, the networking stack has the layer 8 is political, right? And like it's somewhere in there, you're like, I need to figure out why these two teams won't talk to each other, and to do the thing that would be easier than firing off a cron job every 5 minutes.
That's because people are worse than technology. Half the like bad problems that happen, you're just like, bro, who decided that orgs were split up this way and that you two can't talk to each other?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of things we had to learn. Like, for example, how people's relationship with their customers are, we have to learn, because we not only have to build a product to cater to our customers who are the engineers of the SaaS companies, we also have to cater to their customers. So that we have to understand those relationships. What are their touch points? Do they do white glove onboarding? Do they do self-serve onboarding? And build the pieces that make those processes happen. I also personally, just as an engineer who's never done sales before, have had to learn what a CRM is. Why do people use it? What is a lead? What is an opportunity? So yeah, definitely lots of learning on the non-technical front.
Why'd you name it Ampersand?
So we like the name Ampersand because it essentially the vision we have for the company is to make technology just more connected. So making it easier for one tool to talk to another so that there's this connectivity layer between different business applications, and people can build UX, workflows, intelligence on top of that layer. And we think we can really power that connectivity layer. So the ampersand symbol, which is and, it represents that connectivity piece. And it also represents the fact that we're augmenting the engineering capacity of our customers. So it's as if they have additional engineers on board that will help them with their integrations.
My initial thought was this is like it runs in the background for you, like a background process at the terminal. If I put an ampersand at the end, like that process
that's cool
runs
too.
in the background. That was my initial thought. I'm like, oh, it's cool. It's just a background process and it does the thing for me. And then my second thought was, oh, this is like an improv yes and sort of like if you've ever done improv, like that's the prompt that there is like, oh, yes and. And so it's like you were just like, yes, and I can connect you to over here. And yes, and I can do that other thing. And those are the two places that I kind of went. But I mean, it's like you're gluing all these things together and just anding all of them instead of oring them. Or
I think it's really smart because it's kind of like you're the glue that glues all the APIs and pieces together, because your service is going to make it so much easier for people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we are the glue. We were joking that we should have super glue as our swag, like ampersand labeled glue.
I feel like sometimes people name things these like catchy, like little like symbols, and you're like, but that actually really works. And it's like a cute logo, but but also like it makes sense. And then I feel like that just opens you to be able to be like, and then let me tell you why we're the glue. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
It's so
You can use it in your recipes. You can use it
Exactly.
Do it in the food.
just not Justin's cookies though.
What's next for the product and for the infrastructure evolution?
So on the product side, we definitely want to expand into more of these systems of record. So far, we've been very focused on the go-to-market vertical, so building sales and marketing and customer support related integrations. But there's a lot of other SaaS builders out there who need different types of integrations. We want to expand our footprint there. We also want to continue to extend the flexibility of the platform and make it easier for people to add things like transformation functions or custom additional mapping support. We already do a lot in terms of mappings, but I think there's even more that we could do there to really make it a highly flexible, highly extensible, very robust platform for people.
Does that get in the very complex mode of like embedded some TypeScript inside a YAML? Like I have a YAML and then I have this TypeScript block and then I have more. Like, is that seems really difficult to do some of those like data transformations in a more, I don't want to say data only, but in YAML, right? Like in something that is like this, we don't want to have this be fully general purpose code here.
Yeah, I think right now we have a YAML file, but in the future, I definitely see folks being able to define certain transformations in code using a language of their choice. And then the artifact of the integrations will be a directory of different files, not just a single file like we have today. And then once we go there, that's actually another good use case for something like Cloud Functions. We can have sandbox isolated compute dedicated to a customer without it affecting the rest of our stack. So that's a potential future direction. There's also other ways of making maybe pre-built transformation functions, like certain things are common tasks that SaaS companies have to do, like anonymizing sensitive data or maybe stitching different data together to
pipe
be a
this through
complete
PII.
picture.
We'll get rid of all that stuff. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, something like that. I could imagine us having these pre-built already. So you just say, okay, I'll have this integration and then I want this piece of data PII removed, but then I still want to be able to run my LLM on it and still get all the insights. So that's something else we could help with.
That's also really smart, the fact that you're going to enable it for customer private like compute, because a lot of businesses can't share hosts with other people. You know what I mean? So if there's a way for you to make it where it would just be that, especially for data is such a complicated thing because there's different accreditations and there's FIPS and HIPAA and all those different things. So depending on how the Cloud Run would do it, it would be interesting to see if you can give them all like for their different audits and stuff.
Yeah, and that's actually another future direction that we could go in is having Ampersand be deployable on someone's VPC. So if they don't want the cloud offering, making it possible for them to be able to deploy it in their own cloud is something else that we're built for. So we've chosen our stack in order to make that future possible. It's another reason why we're using open source technologies.
That's actually way better than trying to give them their own dedicated host and then deploy it for them, because if they already have their own VPC.
How does that work? Like choosing open source, but also using Cloud Functions. Like Cloud Functions, I can't run in Amazon, right? Like that is a very proprietary interface for running functions somewhere. How would you export that? Or I mean, because you have to like recreate a new interface that is portable or rewrite it for Amazon, right?
There are actually frameworks that makes it more portable. So the serverless framework, serverless.com, that makes Cloud Function more deployable throughout different clouds. So there's when we get there, there's ways we can make it more portable.
Well, Lauren, this has been so much fun. I've learned a lot. Where should people find you online if they want to reach out or get in touch?
Yeah, absolutely. So people can find me on LinkedIn, my first and last name, Lauren Long. I'm also on X/Twitter, although not as active these days, but I still will respond to folks there. So it's Lauren Z Long is the handle. And yeah, find me on the Ampersand company LinkedIn or the Ampersand X. I monitor those also.
If you ever want to leave X and come over to Blue Sky, Fork Around and Find Out now has a guests on the show. So we have a starter pack for it. So anyone that is in Blue Sky, so we're adding those. Anyone that's out there that's following us, you can check that out. And we have anyone that has been a guest is in that starter pack. So
it even helps me to follow our guests.
It only goes up to 150 though. So at some point I need to like switch it over to
we can have like season 1. in season 2.
We could have years. Yeah. We could break
That'd
it
be
out because
cool.
we're only going to have 50 a year, something like that. So.
And then we'll bring back like the retro episodes one day.
You can try to get repeat guests too and see if like you can get the whole starter pack collection. Thank you so much for telling us about Ampersand. Tell us how it works and what you do and kind of those challenges around it. That's been a lot of fun. So
It was nice meeting you.
Thank you so much. This is a lot of fun. Yeah, great meeting you guys, Justin and Autumn. Thank you.
all right. And thank you everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Fork Around and Find Out. If you like this show, please consider sharing it with a friend, a coworker, a family member, or even an enemy. However we get the word out about this show helps it to become sustainable for the long term. If you want to sponsor this show, please go to fafo.fm/sponsor and reach out to us there about what you're interested in sponsoring and how we can help. We hope your systems stay available and your pagers stay quiet. We'll see you again next time.